So, as we're continuing in chapter 5, from ideology, from Adorno to Bourdieu, we're looking at a return, shall we say, to Louis Althusser, the great French thinker. Now, we've seen some of his stuff before about ideology concerning lived relations, right? It's not just a series of propositions or whatever. Rather, it is something that he thinks that we live. But he has an important distinction. So let's be and he distinguishes between science and ideology. So let's have a look at it. Well, he thinks that all thought is ultimately rooted in what he calls a problematic, which is a kind of unconscious framework. Now, we've seen this a lot, people talking about various unconscious frameworks. Bourdieu, whom we'll look at very soon, talks about it as well. And we've seen also in earlier thinkers, like Gramsci and his hegemony and things like that. So that there's these systems that we live in that, have a lot of influence, and we're not even really aware of it. That's the key thing. Okay, and of course, there's I shouldn't forget, like Foucault has the concept of an episteme, Kuhn has the concept of a paradigm. So this idea that thought is always moving within these grand systems and may or may not break out of them, that's a common thing that runs through lots of thinkers. Certainly nothing unique to Althusser. All right, but what he does say is something like this. A scientific problematic, though, it has a flavor much like Kuhn's paradigm. It's open, right? And we've seen open, closed stuff with Habermas, and everybody seems to use this notion of things being open and closed. And of course, Adorno was like, the positive dialectics leads to a closed system, and the negative dialectics in the glory of art, allows us to overcome revulsion and keep things open and not try and suppress all differences. Well, the scientific problematic, according to Althusser, is open in two ways. On the sort of the small level, the narrow level, that statements are falsifiable. Yeah, it sounds like Popper, right? That scientific statements, yes, they say something about the way the world is. So any statement that says something about the way the world is, like the cat is on the table, it says something about the way the world isn't. Namely, if I say the cat is on the table, I'm telling you that the world is not such that the cat is not on the table. So then you could say, well, let's go see. And the statement that when you say the world is some way, it could be falsified. Why? Because if it makes a claim about the world and I go check, and the world is not like that, well, I falsified your claim. I go check and I say, hey, the cat's not there. And he's not on the table, so what you said is false. So if statements are like that, that's in the scientific problematic. That statements, they can be falsified. And the entire problematic itself, in the large sense of openness, in not just the narrow sense with statements, but the whole kind of problematic itself is open to. Why? Because it can be overcome. It can be toppled, right? Again, sounds a lot like a Kuhnian paradigm. But an ideological problematic is not like that, right? It's closed in that its organization of concepts, unlike the scientific problematic, it really only fosters the questions that support it. It fosters the statements that support it, and it doesn't foster really a way that you could negate them, right? So ideologies tend to be self-supporting enterprises, right? They can't correct themselves. They might be able to modify themselves a little bit because, we've seen, as Eagleton has pointed out, ideologies do have to negotiate a little bit. They can't be pure fantasy and pure oppression. There has to be some give and take. But by and large, they don't really have mechanisms by which they can be overturned, or they certainly don't have mechanisms by which, certainly not that they can be overturned. And many of their statements, the key statements, are really immune from criticism, even thinkability, or in that sense, you really can't think the opposite of what some of the fundamental aspects of an ideological problematic would say. But nonetheless, although Eagleton says that there's a scientific problematic, that they're open, and that it's not really the case that science is ideological. He thinks that, like according to Althusser, science is still within ideologies because it can be pressed into the service. We've seen this in a variety of thinkers earlier on. So ideologies, according to Althusser, lived relations. They're not true or false, like scientific theories and problematics are. Again, they're not knowledge, right? It's because they don't follow that notion of truth and falsity and falsifiability. They're not knowledge, so they're not representation of the world, either true or false. But again, they're lived relations. Now I put a little cross here in a circle and a double cross in a circle because I'm going to put those two together down here, and I'll get to that in a second. So people, though, they move quite easily between scientific problematics and ideological problematics. All day. Lots of people, they live in a scientific way and then go back into an ideological way. But Eagleton also says, this could be criticized. Not only, not so much that people move between these things, but there's more range of motion. There's more stuff. There's kind of stuff in between these two. So he's got this dichotomy of the scientific problematic and the ideological problematic. But think about, is Eagleton, so this little box is like Eagleton's criticisms, a couple of them. He's got lots more. Check them out. But I'm just pulling out a couple. He said, lots of statements don't really fit. They're not really falsifiable. They're not really like within an ideology or a closed thing. Like, hey, it's raining. He doesn't think that's really a scientific statement or not. It's certainly falsifiable, but is it really within the scientific problematic? That one's probably not a great example. But stuff like, do you need a lift to the airport? Is that ideological? It doesn't seem to be. And it doesn't seem to be really a scientific statement either. So there would be lots of places for language and human activity that really wouldn't fit. So it's not saying that this dichotomy is wrong, says Eagleton, but it looks like it's insufficient, it's incomplete. Nonetheless, okay, so when people are moving around, there might be more of things to move than just simply you're either in one or the other. So this could be a false dichotomy, but again, doesn't mean that it's completely false and that reality is not like this, but reality is richer, more complicated. Okay, but back to Althusser. So people move between these things quite easily, and Eagleton gives an example like, with the ideological problematic, you got your rally in the morning, and then you're writing an essay of a theoretical point of view on it or something, a more scientific kind of thing in the afternoon. So people move around like that. And we often see that. I mean, like people try to say, look, there's lots of people who are very scientifically minded and are religious, and they say, I do my science during the week and on Sunday I go to church. Okay. Does that really fit? Well, Althusser says it doesn't really have to. People are moving, right? They move, they cross these boundaries. That's what subjects do, right? I'm a subject, you're a subject, individual consciousness. We do that kind of stuff. It's not that big a deal. So if ideologies for Althusser are not true, false, they're not knowledge, they're not representation, they're these lived relations, can we say anything a little bit more about them? Well, ideologies, if we combine this not representation and lived relations, ideologies are self-misrepresentations. Now, this discussion, in order to get a better idea of what Althusser is doing, Eagleton follows Althusser down what I would call the rabbit hole of Jacques Lacan's psychoanalytic theory and notions of the self. That I'm not going to get into. So you can check that out. Eagleton thinks that Althusser has a fundamental misrepresentation of Jacques Lacan's work. But he also admits that it's hard to know what Lacan is talking about, so it's hard to know if an interpreter gets him right or wrong. But it's largely Althusser is using Lacan's theory of the self and how the self can misrepresent itself. Okay, so that's a bit of a mare's nest, but you can have a look at that. I think I'm just going to end my discussion of Althusser in this chapter before next video I'll go to Bourdieu. The key is that ideologies there's all kinds of errors and all kinds of things going in that, not true and false stuff, but misrepresentation, yes, but they are the indispensable medium for producing subjects. You find that in Foucault as well. That these kinds of power structures, epistemes, they're what gives birth to the subject, right? Not the subject like math is a subject and science is a subject, but like I am a subject, right? I'm like the self. That's where the notion of selves come out of is through these kinds of ideologies, and that selves they're born in that. It's like sort of the primal background. It's a necessary background for even people to talk about themselves as selves. All right, so that covers sort of the basics of what he says regarding Althusser in this chapter. Turn to Bourdieu in the next video. See you then.